gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Cross-Examination, the podcast that tries to unpack the meaning behind the faith. Today we turn to a sacrament that speaks of mercy, forgiveness, and new beginnings, the sacrament of reconciliation, also known as penance or confession. Its history is one of fascinating development. In the early church, for very grave sins, penance was often a public and once-in-a-lifetime event. However, over centuries, influenced by Irish monastic traditions, the practice evolved into the private, individual, and repeatable form of confession we know today. It's a journey from public exclusion to a personal encounter with the merciful Christ. To help us understand the power and purpose of this sacrament of healing, we're once again joined by Father Sjaak. Welcome, Father Sjaak.
Hi, nice to be here again.
A little disclaimer here. The history in of itself can be quite complicated. So a disclaimer being that if we do get something wrong in our interpretation of the history, please do feel free to, comment on it or write to us. And obviously we will happily retract or correct if necessary. But this is the understanding as far as myself and Father Sjaak understand it. I wanted to, again, start with this concept that was relatively new to me when I did a bit of research, that it did evolve from a very public process, I guess, a very public sacrament to a very private sacrament. What is your understanding of this transition from very public to very private?
Well, actually, we are going public again, which is a nice sort of going back to the roots. When I look at how often Pope John Paul II and also Pope Francis have made a public display of asking for forgiveness. I will give you some examples later. But they certainly, from the year 2000 onwards, from the Jubilee year 2000, there were several initiatives from the Church public to ask for forgiveness and also to mediate in a healing process. So, yes, it's been a private thing for quite a long time, but we have rediscovered its public effects, not only on society, but also on individual well-being, of course, which in fact also has an impact on society, of course. So it's nice that the word reconciliation comes from reconciliare, which means reuniting with each other. And it, of course, reunites people after a broken relationship. If something went wrong and people are willing to acknowledge it and they ask for forgiveness, then brokenness is repaired. And that is the grace and also the effect of the sacrament. That can be a very individual thing on a one-on-one basis, but it can also have huge impact on society. So it's nice to see that from what it was in the past, we privatized it, but we are rediscovering it in its original roots.
You mean we are rediscovering I guess the examples you gave in terms of it being more public came from really leaders of the church and I guess more prominent people. That is not to say that we are going back to a public practice where, somebody has to put on literally a penance robe and sit in a very specific spot in the church. So it remains also a very private occasion.
Yes, of course. The individual always has, if it's a sacramental process of forgiveness, there is their personal relationship with God. And it is, of course, a merciful God who forgives the sinner, but it does not take away the sin. The sin still needs to be repaired, but it's good to separate the two. So for the human being, there is always mercy. And I think somebody just dropped something in the kitchen, so I may have to give somebody there or breaking something. But no, there is a beautiful rediscovery of its impact on society. And of course, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, there is about 50 to 60 times a mention of forgiveness, depending on what translation of the Bible you use. But it just already shows how important it was in society at the time of Christ. So not only as an individual sacrament, but also a sacrament. A healed person heals also a broken world. So it has also that social consequence. So yes, it's always a faith conversation. Yeah, so it's always with the aim to show mercy in such a way that it changes you. You are being transfigured by God's mercy. And you You could call that the resurrection moment, the rising from an old stage to a new stage. The beautiful thing about the early confessions that were done in public, the penance, was that it reminded the whole church of its ability to forgive. When at Easter, public penitents were readmitted in the church, it was the whole church that gained new life through the forgiveness, but also through the conversion of these penitents. So from their sackcloth and ashes, they received a new status and they were admitted back into society of the church together with the newly baptized, those who sought entrance to the church. So it was a purifying activity, not only for the individual involved, but also for the community itself that saw its healing power.
And so that you touched on the public nature of it. All these elements that you touched on, the healing, that is also very much present in a more private setting, which we would call today more reconciliation, I guess, than penance or confession, I guess.
Yeah, the word confession comes from confacere, which means the acknowledging, the declaration, the admission of something that was wrong. And so, or yeah, you call it see. But there is that element, of course. First of all, you are sorry about what happened. So this contrition, you feel that there's a need for healing. So Jesus says, if you are sick, you go to a doctor. So you feel the need of a self-diagnose. So this contrition, it is guilt. You say sorry. Yeah, that's the first part. And then the confession is the actual naming of what went wrong. You have to pronounce it. You have to articulate it. And
face out in a way.
yeah, bring it to, vocalize it. I mean, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. The priest will then ask, what happened? You can't just express in vague terms. So you have to make it concrete. Why did you come? And then once you put it into words, I think that the naming of it also helps you to identify your area of need, your brokenness, and being honest about it is already part of the healing. I mean, so often with
Owning up to it.
owning out, so often with addictions or when people have pain or whatever, once they articulate it and admit it and seek help, it's already half of the healing or the treatment. Then there is the absolution, the priest grants forgiveness through Christ. And then the restitution, or we've called it penance, but penance is a very negative word, especially when penance is associated with prayer. Very often you hear stories that, well, if something went wrong, you pray 3 Hail Marys and then you
Fight our fathers. Yeah, we said done that.
which of course is terrible in a pedagogical or catechetical way to associate prayer with a prayer. So of course it is through prayer that you reestablish your relationship with God. But if something needs to be repaired, you need to own up to the fact that something went wrong. And if you can still put it right, then you are being sent back into society to do so.
So you mentioned contrition, right? Which is, I guess, or perfect contrition, which is being sorry for offending God in a way. How does one go from attrition, which I think technically is the act of being caught? So you can be sorry for being caught. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are genuinely, authentically sorry for having offended. So how do you, maybe as a priest, how you discern, I guess, the authenticity of the feeling of contrition versus, oh, I'm here because I got caught?
Well, when people come to confession, nobody forces them to do so. So they come voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, whether they come because they were caught or whether they come because they feel guilty in their conscience, that's not up to me to judge. The fact is that they come.
Right. And the act of coming in of itself is for you proof that.
It should be authentic. Somehow, I question it sometimes, especially when you are in countries where people have listened an awful lot to priests always preaching about sin and guilt. So they feel that they are never worthy to receive communion, so they always have to go to confession before. And of course, that's not the case, because then you get confessions, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned last week, and then they repeat something and they come this week again because, this is not what we are for. We have the penitential rite for that at the beginning of Mass that cleans the dirty laundry of the week. You are forgiven. Okay.
That's the commodization, let's put it that way.
If it's something serious, then yes, let's talk about it. but not something that you have repeated 100 times and you are forgiven for 100 times. If you haven't learned to change, then okay, give me some proof that you actually take it seriously.
Yeah. You mentioned like the one-time nature that it was in the past versus now the repeatable thing. So in order to, I guess, what we're talking about now, avoiding a commodization, for lack of a better word, of well, I'll just get penance next week. How do you keep up, I guess, the value and the sacred nature of it in terms of not devaluing it for it being repetitive now? I mean, you mentioned in mass, I guess in the beginning, that helps. But say if you have somebody here that comes every week or every second week with similar sins, how would you handle that as a priest?
I tell him,
Fair enough.
yes, in good catechesis also goes with good pastoral leadership. Some people have been trained or accustomed to fall into a certain routine on the basis of a wrong image of God, who is always out there to catch you or judge you or make you feel guilty. If it's like the eye in the triangle, that looks at you,
All-seeing eye,
yeah, all-seeing eye.
omniscient, omnipresent, and
The St. John's Cathedral in Sacraments, you have that eye in the dome. But the bishop there made a beautiful transition. He said it's not God's eye looking at us all the time to see whether we are right or wrong, but it is actually our eye to look at God, to see Him above us, protecting us and loving us. So it depends on with what eyes you.
And pardon the pun, truth is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, exactly. So now the catechesis also comes with if it's not serious, or if it's not, and you may think, who are you to judge whether something is serious? But a lot of people suffer under a wrong catechesis or a wrong image of God because they have been made to feel always unworthy. And when we say, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you before communion, it doesn't immediately speak about your sinfulness, but it is the legionary who welcomed Christ into his house, the Roman soldier who said to Christ, yeah, who am I? Somebody so insignificant that you, my Lord, come to visit me. So it was not so much a matter of him feeling sinful, but it was the great honor that Christ would come to him, and also the awe and the respect for the person that he received. So in that sense, yes, we can be extremely grateful for the fact that no matter how we stand before God, but okay, we only need to say the word and we shall be healed. So come in, be with me here.
And all that come in those, moving to the other end of the spectrum where there might be people listening or other that have a certain fear of coming here and admits, what would you tell those people?
Fear of coming for confession, yes, or yes, also.
Yeah, just to illustrate my point, so to interrupt you for a sec, as the listeners may know, I do confirmation classes, and we did talk at some point about obscene reconciliation. And the image that some, not all, but some of the kids still have is this, going into a wooden box, and it's kind of scary. You have to say, a certain mantra, very specific words. And so it is somewhat daunting still, I think, to so many people. So what would you say to those people who might still find it quite daunting to come in and confess, I guess?
Well, of course, first of all, you're going there to meet Christ and not a grumpy priest. So you don't need to be afraid of the priest. But of course, if I go and confess in, let's say, a cathedral and I don't know the priest there, of course, it's a bit scary because you never know how he's going to react, and it's also a very personal conversation. So you don't know what sort of priest you are going to meet. But if you go and confess with a priest that you know, and that is also, there are so many ways. You don't only have to do it in a confessional. Yeah, some priests will take you out for a walk, and you can still have a sacramental conversation, a full conversation about the brokenness, the the sinfulness, and then get the absolution. So,
Is that what all our walks in the woods are about?
well, these are things I know, but well, there are many ways in receiving the sacrament, but I can totally understand that, especially when it's for the first time and people have been taught to fear God in a frightening way, they are a bit afraid. And also some of them feel extremely guilty. So it is a very emotional moment to actually hear yourself say, I am here because of this or that. So yes, that I understand that this can be fighting, but also I think most priests nowadays are also enough empathetic to immediately place themselves in the shoes of the penitent, and as a good shepherd, take that person on board.
On that note, was one of my questions, but maybe for David seems relevant now. Why is there a need for, I guess, a middleman, priest, a bishop, somebody from the clergy, as opposed to just confessing to your sins directly to God through prayer or whatever it may be? So why this again middleman in a priest?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a very good question, but it comes down to the fact where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am among you, you know. So the fact that you feel that you belong to a community and that you have a home to turn to, no matter what, is a huge act of trust, but also act of welcome and an act of belonging. So the middleman is the one who puts into words the presence of Christ. Also, with the forgiveness, he pronounces in the name of Christ the absolution. And of course, you can have your personal relationship with God, but if you love your neighbor as yourself, then you show also your love for God. So that horizontal relationship with your neighbor as part of your love for God is fundamental. I think without that aspect, it's a very one-directional relationship. And we can be fooled with that as well, because then you strike a deal with God and you make yourself believe in that.
And you might rationalize your sins and
Into your own street or into your own way of thinking.
yeah.
And of course, somebody who helps you to find a path towards forgiveness, betterment, and all these kind of things is, a counselor, a spokesman, and a healer.
Somebody needs to hold up the mirror,
Yes.
I guess.
And you will also find that, of course, a lot of priests, they also confess with one another.
It's not you're getting ahead of me. Where does the priest go to confess?
Exactly, to colleagues. We have our own moments during retreats, or many of us have a spiritual counselor. I also have one. And I think these people are extremely important for keeping you on track and not sort of making you believe that you can do it all yourself. Maybe we need each other, we need help. So I think that's
Yeah, it's beautiful. It will lead me to this little part of history that we might leave in or not for the reasons, but that you yourself as a priest have your own spiritual mentor. I'm going to go back to apparently an Irish rooted tradition that was established in the 4th, 5th century in the Irish monasteries. Apparently, the Irish church evolved very separately and individually from the Roman church. And it's there that apparently they've developed this tradition called Enam Cara, and I might mispronounce the Gaelic, apologies, which basically means soul friend. And it was this practice that monks would go to, more elderly monks or others, to seek a spiritual mentor and to have this more conversational type of relationship, to seek counsel, to seek, I guess, penance, that was then apparently propagated through these Irish monks, then going to the European continent, establishing monasteries in Germany, France, etc. And that apparently that which has led to the current, I guess, form of confession that we know, which is a more kind of private occasion. So I wanted to put it in there because I really like this concept of the soul friend. I think it's a really beautiful term.
I think you see that very strongly through God parenting, baptism.
Thinking of confirmation as well, where you have
Medicines, ulcers, yes. And I would even say at marriage, the witnesses.
Yep.
We have a role to play in each other's faith life. Yes, in good times and in bad, to both say thanks and then celebrate, but also to be there when we need each other for guidance and for counseling. So in that sense, we fulfill the royal priesthood of all believers. We are anointed at baptism with that particular mission as prophet, king, and priest. But we are, of course, we shepherd each other. And in the ordained ministry, okay, the ordained priest, he is given the privilege to give absolution. But in the end, it is a mission for the whole church. We all have to forgive each other. And of course, if you do, it's a tremendous act of generosity. And it has a tremendous effect on physical and mental well-being. if you can let go and forgive, either receive forgiveness or give forgiveness, it reduces your blood pressure. Medical manifesto. It makes you feel less guilty, less stressful. You put it behind you and you move on. And I've seen so many people who cannot forgive either themselves or others. And therefore they can't move on and they become more depressed and isolated. And we have ridiculous programs here in Holland on television. They ask people who have had family feuds for 20, 30 years to actually talk to each other again. And they've actually forgotten what they were angry about. They still haven't made up. I mean, it is just ridiculous. It's not.
Because it is a difficult thing to own up. Before moving on, you really have to own up to whatever the wrong that has been done to you. You probably played a part in it as well, and it is a very difficult thing to do, to own up to that part. So,
And also put things in perspective, How big is it that you worry about in the big picture of everything that's going on in the world or in your life? How big is something? Because 90% of people who come to confess something about sexuality. Now, how big is that in the entire relationship? Haven't we gone completely overboard by making that topic the main topic of reconciliation and confession?
it's an interesting. Who made that the main topic?
Yes, God knows, but probably the church itself, because we always made people for skill and for about that. But how often do I get an employer that says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned because I've treated my employees in a lousy way,"
That's fair.
or a judge? Nowadays, in this parish, of course, which is a very special parish with lots of diplomats and people in top positions, more and more the idea of ethical and moral behavior is now a topic for confession. But that's also because, for 28 years I've been here, and I've tried to change that concept a little bit as well. God does not only worry about what we do in our bedrooms, but also what we do in the rest of our lives.
Maybe even more so.
I think so. So please look at the total picture. If 90% of your life is good, then don't beat yourself up over something that is worth 10%.
Fair enough. You mentioned, many confessions that you've had throughout your 28 years. Last time with the anointment of the sick, you had a beautiful personal story to kind of illustrate, I think, that the power of the anointing of the sick. Do you have something similar? Is there one story that jumps to mind in terms of, a confession or reconciliation that really powerful, without breaking the seal of confession, that really illustrates the power and the beauty of this sacrament? I'm putting you on the spot here, though.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't really thought this through because I very often, you have routine confessions, and honestly, they wear me out. They are, if people come to me with the same old thing over and over again, I kind of think, oh my God, there is he again or she again, But anyway, you have to be pastoral and nice and kind. That's our job. But the vast majority of people, especially nowadays in a country like the Netherlands, where confession is not practiced widely anymore, of course, very few people come. So those who do come with serious issues. And I really feel humbled that they come and that they own up to something and trust the church or the priest enough to consult him and also to ask for healing and forgiveness. So in that sense, you can go back to their partners or to their lives when you start a process of healing. Confessions are very, very rarely a 5-minute conversation. In some big cathedrals, I had done that myself as well. On Saturdays, my God, I was in the confessional for an entire afternoon, and it was one after the other. And in the end of the day, you couldn't even remember how many people actually came. But here in this part of the world, people come because they really have a serious issue on their mind that needs further counseling and that needs further treatment quite often. And then you can either refer to professionals or to another walk or a coffee or something like that. But you can really help. And I feel very privileged to be in that position here now, because I know that an awful lot of colleagues around the world don't have that privileged position. They are overwhelmed with the quantity and also the pressure of people to always be available and come But of course, in Western Europe, we don't have that anymore. So when they come, you can really be of service. It's
Appreciate it fully for what it is,
yeah,
as opposed to having a more.
and yes, of course, when I see people through that in their relationships come to a renewal of marriage vows, or after a serious breakup in the relationship, you see the difference between a secular and a pastoral counselor. As pastoral counselors, we have instruments that we can use that secular counselors do not have. And that is a ritual, yeah, an ancient ritual.
Mm.
So, if in marriage counseling, for example, forgiveness is ritualized and the spouses are able to express it to each other and base counseling on that. And then you kind of, in the horizon, you sort of put a point to work towards as well. If we work through this, we are going to celebrate it with a renewal of marriage vows. And then that's a public event with the children, with perhaps your witnesses who are present at your wedding. And yes, we bless the rings again, and you give it to each other again. You have that beautiful sort of instrument of ritual that make people accept a transition, a rite of passage, be moved on from one stage to the next.
Playing devil's advocate here for a sec, because I'm sure there would be, a number of listeners that may be not offended, but questioning your statement in terms of pastoral counseling as an edge in a way over secular counseling. One could argue, again, as a devil's advocate, that, the penitence or the confession part of it is, replaced by, I'm sorry. Just the act of saying sorry to someone, which is in of itself very powerful. And then, your renewing of vows could simply be, well, let's have another party and kind of declare it publicly in front of it. It doesn't have to be, I guess, in a church or with a priest present. So again, playing the advocate, what would you say to where is the really unique aspects of the ritual?
Well, this podcast is about sacraments. It renders present what it signifies, and that is Christ's presence. So no matter what, forgive 70 times 7. So always give people a clean start. And that huge feeling of mercy and coming home and being accepted for who you are, but with the invitation to make it the best version of yourself, is the pastoral counseling is for those people who seek healing for their soul. And with that, they show that to them life is sacred. And in that sacredness of life, they show their dignity, they show God's presence. That is why they come, when they come with that particular need, they come to a priest or to a parish.
Amen. I'm going somewhere with this. The highest burnout rate amongst any profession is generally speaking medical responders, first responders in horrible car crashes, etc., for understandable reasons, because what they see, the traumas, the physical harm, the horrible things that they see, and so there's a huge burnout. I'm going somewhere with this in the analogy here being that you bear witness to some terrible mental traumas in terms of, people having gone through, to your point earlier, 20 years of pent up anger, resentment because something hasn't been, etc. So how do you deal with that accumulation, I guess, of stories that you hear? Does that have any bearing on you? Hearing for 28 years, hearing sometimes, I'm sure, horrible stories, not just, sex stories. So how do you cope with that as a human being, not necessarily as a priest?
Well, first of all, I think you have to have good colleagues and good people that you can also relate with. Here in the parish, I'm very lucky. I have a deacon. His name is Paul, and he's also a medical doctor. So we go out for a beer now and then, just sort of compare notes. That helps. A sense of humor helps, of course, but also friends outside the church, because if your world is only the church as a priest, it can also become a very limited world. So it's very healthy to have a few worlds outside of your work and mix and mingle in circles where you can also put it into a little bit of a wider context. Of course, also your own feeling of I can't solve everything. I can take a lot on board, but it is in the end God who heals and God who takes the burden. So yes, I can only listen and do what I can, but I can't fix the world. And so take yourself with a little bit of bit of pinch of salt is important as well.
Easier said than done, I'm sure, but
Take good care of yourself. So spoil yourself a little bit as well. Maybe good food and fun and good friends, and of course,
see the good side of life sometimes.
yes, and good connections in terms of quality of life, but also prayer and silence and meditation. If you can't handle it anymore, yeah, then it's also important that you can let it go and say, okay, well, this is what I can do, and that's it. I give it back to you. And what I always say, it kind of joking, but I also mean it. The Lord always provides in one way or another. Somehow, if you don't trust that anymore, then yeah, you better stop, because then you take it onto yourself, and then it becomes too much to handle. But in the end, you're not doing it on your own, and you're doing the Lord's work, and I don't want to sort of over dramatize that, or be too pious with that, but same time, it's true. But then I was just wanting to go back to a few, to Chris, you asked, what were things that made you feel proud of, or what were personal experiences of forgiveness or grateful for the experience? I think on the individual confession, is what I mentioned earlier, when you can give people back to themselves or to their relationship. But the big public displays of confessions that have happened, let's say, since the year 2000, through religious leaders. Let's say Desmond Tutu in South America, the perpetrators and the victims of apartheid, trying to bring them.
South Africa.
In South Africa, yes.
It's South America.
Oh, sorry, it's of course, South America is my heart, but I mean. But that Truth and Reconciliation Commission was absolutely amazing. And in Rwanda, you have the same, past the genocide. Yeah, that's again after 800,000 victims of violence. And there was this whole process of trying to seek for healing and forgiveness. In the Vatican in the year 2000, Pope John Paul II asked for all the Christian wrongdoings, the crusades and the abuse and God knows what went wrong in all these years of history. In 2014, 15, Pope Francis helped to reunite Cuba and the United States by Castro and Obama to sort of make them reconcile. South Sudan in 2019, when Pope Francis kissed the feet of the Sudanese leaders. He was already, he had difficulty bending over and walking, and he was an old man, and he actually kissed the feet of these Sudanese leaders.
The ultimate expression of humility, man.
Absolutely. And begging them for peace. And when a leader can be so big in making himself so small because it matters to him, yeah, I think that for me, that was an amazing display of what people can actually do to, get a situation out of a rut, out of a dilemma that doesn't move it forward. And so I thought these displays, I just wanted to mention it, were absolutely.
Uh, the key, not key theme, but it is something that I often think myself, is showing vulnerability is a huge strength. It's a bit of a, how'd you say it, an an oxymoron in a way.
Mhm.
But I do think all the examples you've shown, and in our personal lives, everyday lives, to show contrition, to show vulnerability, to show that to say that you're sorry, it shows also a huge amount of strength that you can own up to your own mistakes. I think is a great virtue to have. Just more on a practical side thing. We mentioned the seal of confession earlier. Can you explain a little bit its absolute, if absolute, and unbreakable, if unbreakable nature? At which point is there a scenario even where the seal of confession is broken?
Yeah, that's it should. Yeah, so the seal of confession is sacred in that sense, and even civil law respects that. But I must say that if I feel that a certain confession goes into the direction of a criminal act, then I will warn people that either in the penance, I will ask them to turn themselves in, or if they are not willing to repair the act that they have committed, then it is an absolution under conditions. I mean, God will always forgive, but it doesn't diminish the sin. The sin remains. So there needs to be some sort of retribution, some sort of repayment. And if I hear, for instance, that there has been a case of child abuse or whatever, during the confession, I will say, you realize, even though there's a sin of confession, but there are consequences to this. You cannot just treat confession as thinking, I've said it, now I got rid of it, and now I'm done. Now it's over. It's not. Yes, if you are forgiven by God, you still have a task to heal your relationship with society or with the person that you have caused great hurt or damage. So we have a responsibility, even though we will not announce in public what somebody has done. Of course, you can't, but you do have a strong role to play in bringing the perpetrator to justice.
Imposing, not imposing, and I guess making them realize the serious nature of it, the value, I guess, also in repenting or repaying, whichever way is it. But at no point in time will you yourself instigate, I guess, a process to repayment, whether it's, so that seal of confession in that
Exactly.
nature will always be absolute.
No, I will not contact the police if I know that somebody killed somebody else.
That must be hard to do, though.
Yes,
I'm not sure if it was a case. Let's not go there, but that must be a hard thing to do, not to feel compelled to, I guess, force that person, even if they don't want to go into a repayment or, again, repenting kind of mode.
but if the person doesn't want to sort of own up to his sin and face the consequences, then what is the point of that confession?
Fair enough.
So I can influence the conscience of a person in that way, but I cannot turn him in, or in court, I cannot be witness to what he said in confession.
Is that a universal? I mean, obviously, civil law and knowledge you're more familiar with, but is this universally in most countries where it's protected that never a priest can be called up to the stand, for example? I can't think of an example where it isn't the case, but
I mean, they can call, whatever, if that happens in the country, but the priest,
you will be protected.
well, yeah, he can't. I mean, that's simply, it is difficult because, trust me, in Rio de Janeiro, in the slums, I knew of killings and what happened there, the violence, what was tremendous. There were so many kids, street kids, that died because of so-called balas perdidas, lost bullets,
Stray bullets.
stray bullets, and people who they would admit that they fired these guns, not aiming purposely at the child, but yes, it was because of their recklessness that children died. So,
But I guess the price to pay for breaking that seal is probably, in a bigger picture, much bigger than withholding your peace, I guess, in the sense that if that were to happen, you break the trust immediately, I guess.
and I think that is one of the safeguards, the church, that it is between the penitent and God in the end. Now, if that relationship matters, and I hope that it does, otherwise he wouldn't have been there in the confession in the first order, because they'd be forced to go. That relationship is enough motivation for a person not only to seek forgiveness, but also to seek justice. And not in the political sense, because justice is very often interpreted as, well, we will bring that person to justice, but that means prison sentence or military strength or an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Violence.
In the end, we are looking for mercy. We are looking for not just repayment of the sin through punishment, but also what is punishment worth it because it leads to improvement of life. So we are looking for a transfigured, a transformed person. Yeah, that is a very slow process.
To maybe round up, you mentioned sin, which is obviously inherently attached to the process of reconciliation. And this is maybe a too generalized statement, but in a world that, is doing away with the concept of sin, again, it's a statement that can be debated, but I think secularization could be tied to, doing away with the concept of sin. What do you think that the sacrament of reconciliation has a role to play? Is it still necessary? Is it more than ever necessary? I mean, we do see a resurgence, I think, of spirituality, generally speaking. I'm not sure if I'm asking the question very eloquently, but Again, in a trend where sin is done away with, what is still the role of reconciliation, I guess?
Yes. No, I think you touched on a very valid point. A lot of people have no guilt or no feeling of I've done anything wrong. And in the big picture, that may be so, but there are people definitely that need to be accountable for their behavior that somehow never felt wrong about it, you know?
But isn't that what the court system is for? The ICC here around the corner is
Yes, but of course, with these institutions. But can you imagine Netanyahu now, who is wanted by the court, proposed that Trump would get the Nobel Prize for Peace? So, okay, Netanyahu is a Jew, Trump is a Christian. I don't know what that faith matters to these people. I know what it matters for votes, but not for, for real conscious examination of conscience. But I think if they would go to their religious leaders and ask whether that's okay, that these religious leaders, the Pope in this case, who's an American, also, he's also a Peruvian, I would say, get the whole picture, look at your acts, and though they speak for themselves, how can you, on the one hand, preach this and do something completely different? So, yes, the moral and the ethical compass, there will always be a need for it. And I hope that, and I also trust that you don't need to be talking of sin all the time. But good and evil, sometimes then the boundaries of that need to be reset and they need to be quite clear. If you cross a certain line, then you are no longer good. This is wrong. And therefore, the power of evil, yes, when it becomes more and more vague, people become more and more permissible. But I think a child and an adult, when we know the boundaries, we also feel more safe and feel more better about ourselves when we live within these certain criteria and certain rules. So I don't want to go back to the 10 Commandments. Christ made it quite simple. You have the old law and the new law. But in the new law, if you love your neighbor as yourself and God above all else, you don't just pick your neighbors who love you, because that's very easy to love them back. But it also includes the neighbors who are, who are less favorable to you. And then how do you repair that relationship? And where did it go wrong? I think with a lot of conflicts nowadays, we retaliate with a lot of strength on impulse very quickly, because in the press we need to show that we are strong and we make people feel that we are doing something about it. But have we really taken time to understand the conflict? Why did somebody react in this way? And why was somebody so angry that he lashed out in this way?
Anything else you want to share about
Well,
the sacrament?
the sacrament of reconciliation and concept of forgiveness never grows old, no matter how secular a role becomes. We are always in need of forgiveness. And of course, through the institution of the church, we have made it something sacramental. We've said, "Lord, this is something that renders God present." We may have lost that sort of sacredness of the forgiveness. Now, there's a beautiful task for us to regain that. So if you don't treat life as sacred anymore, or don't show it through your forgiveness and your mercy, then life has a very secular value. And the secular value is very often based on a utilitarian value. If I profit or benefit from it, then somehow. But a sacramental value is grace. It is given without conditions, free of charge, and it is God's gift. So, yeah, you can take that on board or you don't. But for 2,000 years, this has been a gift to the world.
And counting.
At the world, or in the world that it was given, it was also pretty secular, of course.
Maybe a very ignorant question. Is this sacrament of the concept, I guess, is this unique to the Catholic Church, the Christian faith?
Yes, absolutely. Confession, as we understand it, is a very Catholic thing. Yes.
Interesting. Maybe something for
Protestant churches, yes, they don't have the same sacrament as we do. No, not on that. And they miss it.
Next time we'll talk about the next sacrament. Father Sjaak, any preference?
Yes, let's go to the Eucharist. Do this in memory of me. What is that we do?
Can I say that this is one of your favorite, if not your favorite sacrament? If there is such a
The most frequently practiced.
the most drink for sure. So join us next time for another podcast about the Eucharist. Lastly, we would both greatly appreciate your contribution, questions on our various socials, so we can weave them into our conversation. So share your questions, share your concerns, share your challenges even, to make it even more relatable, these conversations. So I guess the key line being, don't be a stranger. Thank you very much for listening. Father Sjaak, thank you again.
Thank you.
And talk to you next week.
Okay.